Hey nerds! When Idiocracy was released back in 2006, like nobody expected it to become culturally significant. It wasn't a major box office success. It received fairly mixed reviews. For a long time it just was this fairly obscure corner of science fiction comedy. Apparently, even 20th Century Fox struggled to market the film, so they gave it this unusually limited theatrical release for the time, and then it more or less disappeared without making much impact. For a while anyway. Instead of completely fading away, it ended up finding a bit of a second life. Firstly through DVD and television broadcasts and streaming, and then eventually the internet.
The internet! Oh please, no flash photography, you'll harm the internet.
By the mid-2010s, references to the film were pretty common online, like politicians, journalists, scientists, good old Gen Pop out here on social media, all started making the same comparison whenever the news seemed to get especially absurd. Today, the phrase "Idiocracy wasn't a comedy, it was a documentary" is probably more famous than the film itself. Now, I've spoken about it before, and you guys bring it up in my comments a lot, so I thought it was time for a revisit. To be honest, what actually has pushed me back towards it was the Men's World Cup final. Like, the World Cup was jointly hosted by Mexico, Canada, and the US, but from how the final played out, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you were watching a TV commercial dominated by United States culture, branding, completely over-the-top consumerism. Between that and the UFC Freedom 250 event, it just feels like Idiocracy has become very hard to avoid as a comparison. So, my name is Abby, I talk about the science in fiction and pop culture, and you should subscribe if that sounds like your thing.
You got the highest score in history, brought to you by Carl's Jr.
Now, originally the movie was a broad satire, right? It was an exaggerated comedy about this ridiculous future, and to be honest, I didn't really enjoy it. It's just not my type of comedy, you guys, but I will say Luke Wilson, Maya Rudolph, and Terry Crews will win me over any day, and I will very happily confess that I think the time machine gag is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But what's interesting here is how the film's reputation has changed as our relationship with the media has changed. Idiocracy is this goofy comedy, but today audiences look at it as a useful reference point for the modern world. People bring it up when they're talking about misinformation, celebrity politics, anti-intellectualism and consumer culture, or just this like general feeling that life is becoming more and more detached from expertise and evidence. Idiocracy has become a kind of cultural metaphor. It's something people refer to when they feel like society is moving in the wrong direction. Now, I think that's probably why it stayed relevant for so long. Like, most satires are tied very closely to the moment that they were made in, but Idiocracy keeps finding new audiences because we keep moving closer to that fictional society. We have real, genuine concern that the systems society depends on are becoming less capable of dealing with complexity. Now, you could say Idiocracy is simply a movie about people getting stupider. That's definitely the premise. But if that was the whole story, I'm not really sure it would have stayed in everyday political language for nearly 20 years. Plenty of stories imagine like humanity becoming less intelligent, but very few of them become the thing that people quote every time the news gets weird. Now, to be clear here, I am not suggesting that my reading of it is what the filmmakers intended. I don't know what they were aiming for. Like, it may well have just been a goofy post-apocalyptic comedy about a future obsessed with branding, but cultural meaning can overtake original intention. It's happened many times before. Once a film becomes part of public language, people start using it to explain things that the original creators may never have had in mind. And this movie highlights something that we are all feeling today. Expertise seems to carry less weight. Evidence has to compete with entertainment, and as long as someone appears confident, it sometimes seems like they don't actually need to be competent. Whether that assessment is fully correct is another question. So, is Idiocracy really a story about intelligence, as its opening sequence suggests? Or is intelligence the plot device that lets us explore the way societies decide who they should listen to?
Most science fiction of the day predicted a future that was more civilized and more intelligent. But as time went on, things seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, a dumbing down.
Now, the science problem with Idiocracy is not that intelligence has nothing to do with genetics. That would be too simple. Intelligence is a real area of study in genetics and psychology, and genes do play a role, just not in the way the movie suggests. Like, the opening sequence treats intelligence like a single inherited trait that gets passed down from parent to child. Smart people have fewer children, dumb people have more children. And then over time, the whole population declines. That gives the movie like this really clean explanation for the future, but human traits are not that neat and tidy. Intelligence isn't a biological switch. It's not controlled by one intelligence gene, and it isn't handed down to people. It involves a mix of inherited factors in some cases, but also environment, development, education, health, and opportunity. So when we say genes influence intelligence, that doesn't mean intelligence is fixed by genes. That's where the film's biology is like really weak. And when we talk about evolution of inherited traits, like 500 years sounds like a long time, but the movie's not showing this like subtle shift in a population. It's showing a near total collapse of language, medicine, engineering, agriculture, law, political decision making. That makes far more sense as a cultural collapse than a straightforward genetic process. And culturally, like, things can change quickly. Now, originally, I would have thought like, nah, mate, this is ridiculous, what you on about? But if we look at the difference in science and media literacy from 2018 just to now, like, it's obvious how fast information habits can shift. Social media has changed what people see and who they trust, as well as how quickly misinformation can spread. So maybe 500 years actually isn't that wild for a major cultural shift. The weak part is just the actual science. But there is a part in this opening sequence that I personally find way more insulting, and it's the way that it makes education and class look like they're the same thing. Like, the intelligent couple are responsible, educated, and they're upper middle class. The less intelligent families are poor, impulsive, and irresponsible. The film isn't just suggesting that these people have different cognitive abilities, it's implying that poor people are dumb. Now, I grew up in a council house, raised by a single mother, and we relied on social welfare. My mother now has a university degree, and I'm at the University of Oxford doing a PhD in physics. It took both of us longer to get to where we are because of circumstances and opportunities, but not because of intelligence. Now, I would love to have had a more traditional path. I'd love to be established in a career by now and like own a house and, you know, I don't know, take a holiday abroad. That'd be lovely. But that's not the path I had. There are so many people out there with like huge potential who can't achieve what they're capable of because of circumstances. And to be fair, there are also plenty of people who look like they're high achievers because privilege made the path easier. So yes, the film is satire, of course it is. It's not a scientific paper, we're not going to overanalyze it. But the joke still relies on this old eugenic idea that the wrong people having too many children will drag society down. Now, I do want to say I understand that the opening sequence doesn't really have the room for like the reality or the complexity of the argument because the joke needs this neat statement: the stupid people had too many children. So we can just agree that Idiocracy is bad biology, but we can also say that it is useful cultural satire, because the future it imagines makes more sense as a failure of culture and institutions than as this genetic story that they set up. The story starts with reproduction, but the world that Joe ends up waking up in is really about what happens when a society stops knowing how to recognize competence. And guys, that is what I feel like I am seeing every day when I look around me.
Brawndo the Thirst Mutilator had come to replace water virtually everywhere.
Now, one of the biggest jokes in Idiocracy is probably Brawndo. The crops are dying because everyone has been watering them with an energy drink instead of water. Joe points out that plants need water, and everyone keeps repeating the same ad slogan. Brawndo has electrolytes, and electrolytes are what plants crave. It's funny because it's not a complicated science problem. Plants needing water isn't some like advanced knowledge. It's about as basic as biology gets. But the people in the room can't reason their way through it because the slogan is what they've learned. They're using something that sounds scientific without understanding what it actually means. And that's happening a lot online these days. This like Lucozade for plants part is the obvious joke, but the reality is that the ad campaign won. A branded claim has become accepted as common sense. Nobody needs to understand the science because the marketing has already told them what the answer is. Now, Brawndo also isn't just a product that people happen to like. It is the go-to form of hydration across the whole of society. Water is treated as this strange, suspicious, and almost like a dirty thing. Like they keep associating it with toilets instead of life. So the most basic substance required for our survival has somehow lost a public relations battle against a sports drink. It's a very stupid joke, but it's not a stupid observation. The truth is that public understanding can be reshaped by repetition, by branding, by commercial incentives. If people hear the same claim enough times from enough places, especially when it's attached to something familiar and profitable, it can start to feel true. This is why I worry about the monetization of social media and the virality of misinformation. It's easy to assume that people won't fall for things, but if you hear something enough times from enough places, you might start to question reality. The thing is that science actually cares about whether a claim survives testing, but advertising only cares whether a claim sticks. In the Brawndo plot, nobody is asking the basic questions anymore, like, does it actually work? Or why would plants need electrolytes? The answer is just replaced by this loop. Brawndo has electrolytes. Electrolytes are what plants crave, therefore Brawndo is good for plants. That's it.
I'm pretty sure what's killing the crops is this Brawndo stuff.
But Brawndow's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brawndo.
Yeah, but why did they use them to make Brawndo?
Because Brown's got electrolytes.
So the government just repeats the slogan, the economy depends on it, the public believes it. By the time Joe suggests water, he isn't just arguing against ignorance. He's arguing against a whole system that has organized itself around the wrong answer being profitable. But today, 20 years on, that doesn't really feel like a joke anymore. A society can have access to information and still make terrible decisions if that information is buried under branding or like a spectacle and all of these financial incentives. Water, the drink of life, has lost the culture war.
Next on the Violence Channel, an all-new Camacho.
Now, after Brawndo, we also have the rest of the media environment. There are screens everywhere in Idiocracy, but very little information. Like television, advertising, politics, and public announcements all seem to be part of the same, just noisy background. Everything is loud, it's immediate, it is designed to get a reaction. Again, you guys, today's online climate really isn't beating the charges, is it? The obvious example here is, of course, ow, my balls! The show Frito is watching. It's exactly what the title says. There is no story, there's no setup, there's not even a real joke beyond just a man being repeatedly hit in the freaking balls for entertainment. It's basically a simplified version of Jackass. Then we also have the film Ass, which has supposedly won 8 Oscars, including Best Screenplay. It's a ridiculous gag. But the point is that culture still exists in this future. They still have films, they still have award ceremonies, they've got celebrities, but everything has been stripped down to the most basic possible stimulus. Now, the film's media world also helps to explain why people stay where they are. Because if every screen is loud and violent and sexualized, attention is constantly being pulled away from thought. The public isn't just uninformed, it's overstimulated, and that makes learning really difficult. We see Joe's trial working in like a similar way. Like, it doesn't feel like it's an actual legal process. It's this public performance. The people involved are still using a shape that looks like a justice system, but the process itself is just theater. Nobody's really trying to understand what happened. And the same with the politics. Like, President Camacho's speeches are entertainment events. He's a celebrity doing a performance for a crowd, which gives him some form of authority. Competence is less important than whether people feel excited by him. Now, the problem today is that the film's future feels more familiar than it should. Societal collapse doesn't have to mean everything shuts down. Sometimes the systems can keep running, but they just slowly lose the ability to do the thing that they were originally supposed to do. Something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I don't know if anyone's seen it or read it, is Cloud Atlas. Like, I never watched the movie, but I read the book years ago, and I absolutely love David Mitchell's writing, and I'm planning on doing a video on it soon because I think it has some really interesting ideas around evolution, technology, and humanity, and where we might end up if we don't start taking ourselves seriously again. Now, I'm not saying that our current media is like the same as Idiocracy. The film is an exaggeration, but the incentive problem is recognizable. Modern platforms are rewarding attention, and content adapts to that. If outrage or humiliation, fear, or just like a spectacle performs well, then more of that content gets made. And over time, the media environment starts selecting for whatever keeps people watching, not whatever helps people understand. That's a very difficult environment for expertise to succeed in, and it's a major problem that we see right now for us. To explain something properly, you need time. You need to be able to give context and to correct yourself as well without being treated as it's a weakness. The problem is that simple claims with like really strong emotions connected to them spread faster than a careful explanation. Now, Idiocracy presents a world where people are surrounded by media, but the media doesn't help them interpret anything. There's plenty for them to watch. There's plenty of content for them to react to, but almost none of it builds any sort of understanding about how the world works.
He's gonna fix everything. I give you my word as president.
Now, I want to talk about President Camacho for a minute because he's easy to treat as like a joke about celebrity politics. And obviously, of course, that is part of it. He's a former wrestler, he's an adult film star, and he becomes president of the United States. His speeches are loud and theatrical. He enters as if he's coming into a WWE ring. But in the world of Idiocracy, Camacho is also supposed to be one of the more capable people around. So it'd be a disservice to just dismiss him as a joke. Until Joe arrives, he is literally the smartest person alive. That's why he's president. He knows the country has a serious problem, and he knows that the crops are failing. And when Joe is identified as more intelligent than everyone else, Camacho brings him in to help. He's not anti-science in the way that we often see today. Like, he doesn't reject Joe because Joe knows more than him. He doesn't call him like part of some elite conspiracy or accuse him of trying to control the population with water. He wants the problem fixed. The issue is that Camacho's world has no real way to understand expertise. Camacho can recognize that something is wrong, but he's still operating inside a culture that's been taught that like slogans are what to listen to instead of like reasoning. But that does make him different from a lot of modern day anti-science politics, as hilarious as it sounds. Today, the problem is often not just ignorance, it is active rejection. Like, climate scientists, vaccine experts, epidemiologists, engineers, academics, journalists, they can all just be dismissed as corrupt, elitist, woke, or part of like this some vague establishment that we're all being paid by. Guys, nobody is paying me. I'm freaking broke. What are you on about? Expertise doesn't just fail to persuade people. It can make people suspicious. And that's not quite what's happening with Camacho. Like, he is ridiculous, of course, but he still asks for help. In some ways, that actually makes the comparison to today more insane because parts of our actual media environment is worse than the satire in Idiocracy. Guys, The president listens when the smartest guy is identified. In real life, we have experts already telling us what the problem is, and people still decide that the expert is the enemy. Now, Camacho also shows how authority works in this world. Like, he performs leadership through spectacle because that's the language that everyone understands. The crowd responds to his confidence and to the volume and the entertainment that he brings. That doesn't mean that he has no interest in solving the crisis. It just means that the culture around him has turned leadership into a performance, which, again, we're seeing a lot of today. 20 years ago was ridiculous, but today it's painfully accurate. Idiocracy is showing us a society where people are ignorant because their culture has failed to educate them. Today, we also have systems that actively monetize confusion. Like, bad information is not just floating around the place by accident. It can be profitable, it's viral, it is politically useful. So the thing is, Camacho's not actually a villain in the film. He's better than most leaders that we have today, which is an insane thing to say. So, what are we actually taking from Idiocracy? Like, saying Idiocracy as a documentary or that it predicted the future, honestly, it's giving the film too much credit. Like, let's be real here. The science of the intelligence decline is just bad science. It has like a way too simplistic view of intelligence, and it uses some very ugly assumptions about class, reproduction, and social worth. And that part absolutely deserves criticism. But the reason people keep coming back to it isn't because like the genetics are good or anything. It's because the world of the film feels more and more relevant to what we are seeing in our own world. A society where people don't really know how to tell the difference between evidence and confidence. Where people talk all the time about how you should question everything, but nobody has been taught how to test a claim or how to look into whether something is actually true. Idiocracy is looking at our relationship with science through a culture dominated by consumerism. Science hasn't like disappeared from the film's world, but the understanding has gone. And that, you guys, is what terrifies me about what I see online today. A lot of people aren't anti-science in the sense that they reject every scientific word. Like, they'll use the language of science constantly. They'll talk about chemicals or toxins, frequencies, hormones, immunity, seed oils, quantum physics, microplastics, whatever the algorithm is currently feeding them. But using scientific language is not the same as actually thinking scientifically. Like, thinking scientifically means asking what the claim actually means. It means asking who benefits from it, what the evidence is, whether the explanation matches reality, and what would change your mind. That's media literacy as much as science literacy. And this is where corporate influence and monetization become really hard to ignore. I've spoken about it many times on my channel. Like, we don't just see information because it's useful or true. We see information now because it's what's performing well, because it's getting clicks and it's keeping us watching. But mostly it's because someone can make money from our attention. I don't think Idiocracy is a documentary, but I do think that we are in a very dangerous time and that the future is more clouded than I ever thought it would be. Like, the danger isn't that everyone's just gonna like suddenly become stupid. The danger we're facing is that people want to be critical without the thinking part. Now, I just want to say here that the science side we can all agree is bull, right? But this commentary side that I've just given in this video is entirely my own personal thoughts and opinions, and you may not agree with that. That's okay. But I do want to know what you think. Like, how do you feel about the movie? How do you think it holds up today? And where do you think we are heading? Between you and me, I had a science movie review podcast for like years, and recently I'm trying to put all of my old notes and commentary together to spend some more time maybe like talking about just talking like about science fiction, and not just like the big explainers of physics that I do. I also want to look more at like how science is being used in storytelling and how it's presented in the media. So if you have any movie recommendations or anything that you want me to talk about, then please do drop it in the comments. Now, if you're still here, and before we close this out, I want to ask you one more thing. I want your best guess as to how many comments there are talking about my hair color. You know it, you know it. Well, if you like this video, you might like my video all about how Project Hail Mary handles alien communication, or you can check out my Pop Science playlist here. Thanks for watching. Oh, please do subscribe and hype this video if you enjoyed it, because it really just helps me keep going. Stay nerdy.